and I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. That should send a very powerful message.
This is simply outrageous. The two-level police starter system led to a completely shocking situation. Peter Lynch was sentenced to 3 years in prison and placed in the same cell with a group of Muslims after insulting police officers during last summer's riots. The jury expressed their extreme dissatisfaction, stressing that such cases undermine confidence in the integrity of the legal system, which should be a bulwark of justice. How can such disproportionate punishments be justified when some receive harsh measures for their actions, while others who have committed atrocities are released faster than they have time to realize their actions? The issue of justice and equality before the law puts us on the verge of despair, because it seems that justice is isolated from reality, and society is plunging into the abyss of distrust of institutions that are designed to protect law and order.
Well, that is an astonishing admission about potentially biased judges, and one that needs to be investigated. Did they feel that people needed to make an example of because of stuff like this?
And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. That should send a very powerful message.
We might have the strongest possible evidence yet for two-tier justice in Britain. Today, GB News came into possession of this extract from the House of Lords records, which reveals that the Justice Minister, Lord Ponsonby, made this admission about people locked up for their role in the disorder. So here he is. He says, this was a particular situation where maybe the judges felt that even people who were of previous good character needed to be made an example of, but that was a matter for them. Well, that is an astonishing admission about potentially biased judges, and one that needs to be investigated. Did they feel that people needed to make an example of because of stuff like this?
And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. That should send a very powerful...
It was planned from the very beginning. The aim was to instill fear among people whom they consider to be far right. The mistreatment of those who sell anti-immigration stickers contrasts with the merciful treatment of migrants who were given a second chance. It looks truly ironic. The government is entirely focused on the threat allegedly posed by the far right, ignoring the true causes of discontent in society. The current situation certainly points to a discrepancy between the promises of reducing migration over the past 2 decades and the reality where migrant flows are only increasing. Where is the justice here? Against the background of a blatant two-tier law enforcement system, when some receive privileges and others face repression, it becomes clear that the true problems are not being solved. Society is divided, and this division continues to deepen, with consequences that will be difficult to fix. Don't they understand that such actions only contribute to further polarization?
Over 400 people now have been arrested, 100 have been charged, some in relation to online activity, and a number of them are already in court. And I'm now expecting substantive sentencing before the end of this week. That should send a very powerful message to anybody involved, either directly or online, that you are likely to be dealt with within a week, and that nobody should be involving themselves in this disorder.
Starmer chose the path leading to repression, instead of carefully understanding the problems faced by citizens. Instead of constructive dialogue and search for solutions, he preferred to make assumptions about the causes of social instability, acting on the basis of stereotypes and fears. Launching mass arrests for statements on social media is a step that society has not been waiting for, and it has become a wake-up call about how the government reacts to criticism and discontent. Short-term measures designed to prevent possible unrest can lead to lasting consequences for freedom of speech and human rights. It can be assumed that this is only the first step towards even stricter restrictions. Society should pay attention to these signs, which may indicate authoritarian tendencies. Each of us has a responsibility to protect democratic values and rights. Otherwise, we risk finding ourselves in an environment where opinions will be suppressed and dissent will become a crime. I wonder how far Starmer can go before he realizes that harsh measures do not solve the underlying problems. We will never vote for Labour again, and Labour itself is on the edge of a precipice. They should have created a new system based on trust in people and respect, because attempts to organize society no longer bring results. As a true patriot, I express my dissatisfaction with this state of affairs. The police, trying to avoid confrontation, actually only aggravates the situation. And it's hard for me to imagine what's going on in the minds of these police officers. What are their real feelings and fears when they encounter aggressive groups? In this context, Starmer's dialogue with Nigel Farage is interesting. No matter how he tries to justify the actions of the police, it is obvious that double standards do not work, and the situation requires in-depth analysis. Society must see the truth and look for ways to eliminate this outrage.
Yesterday we witnessed some extraordinary celebratory scenes outside Britain's prisons where in some cases serious career criminals were released. And this to make way for, yes, rioters, but equally those who've said unpleasant things on Facebook and elsewhere on social media. Does the Prime Minister understand? There is a growing feeling of anger in this country that we are living through two-tier policing and a two-tier justice system.
I'm angry to be put in a position of having to release people who should be in prison because the last government broke the prison system.
It was completely ridiculous. The entire audience burst into laughter when he talked about the two tiers. They had no idea that anyone would be so brave as to bring up the subject, but they forgot that Nigel Farage was among them. And what did Starmer do in the end? He did not even touch on the issue of the two-level accusation of the police, but instead turned his attention to the issue of guilt, trying to shift it to others. Instead of taking sincere measures to remedy the situation, Starmer chose to simply evade responsibility. It seems that it is more important for him to save face than to really solve the problems facing society. Farage says that such a position will only exacerbate existing problems and lead to even greater difficulties in the future.
This week, a suspected rapist was let out of prison by Keir Starmer. I'm not making this up. You'd have seen the news, the first few of 5,500 prisoners who were going to be released between now and the end of October, and he was immediately rearrested on suspicion of rape and sexual assault. And I know that young people who want to go out on Friday and Saturday nights, women perhaps more than men, are really scared about what's going on Britain's streets. And I tell you what, folks, letting people out of prison who are suspected of being rapists is not the right way to go. We need to build more prisons and keep people inside for longer. Tell me, please, give me some comments. What do you think?
It's amazing how one inappropriate act can lead to a chain of even more ridiculous decisions. It is not surprising that such a superficial approach to solving complex issues is behind drastic policy changes. Each new step only indicates the lack of a clear plan of action. Unfortunately, this situation only exacerbates the general chaos and causes public discontent. Starmer in his youth had a radically different opinion.
Where a communication is, as it were, merely offensive, grossly offensive, etc., then principles of free speech and free expression require there to be a high threshold and dictate that a prosecution is unlikely to be in the public interest in many of those cases.
Involved, you're culpable and you will be put before the courts if you've broken the law, and so that's happening today, that sentencing. I do agree that we're going to have to look more broadly at social media after this disorder, but the focus at the moment has to be on dealing with the disorder and making sure that our communities are safe and secure.
I do think it's time that the court system became much more of a place where the ordinary person feels they can go, and I think that means stripping judges and lawyers of their wigs and gowns and making it much more like a GP's help.
We see how people transform as soon as they gain power, and Starmer is no exception. I can't understand why it's so hard to show common sense sometimes. For example, he sent to prison a 61-year-old man, about whom nothing is known, who had no criminal past, for an impulsive decision made as a result of emotions caused by the tragic events in Southport. Earlier, Starmer criticized Sunak for his ineffective actions on migration policy. However, after seeing the dissatisfaction of the working class due to the lack of changes, he suddenly began to accept them as far-right. His behavior only exacerbates the problem, setting the stage for the popularity of figures such as Tommy Robinson. As long as people like Starmer continue to ignore the root causes of discontent, the situation will only get worse. See you next video.